Hey guys, welcome back to the Far Better Podcast. I am your host, Michael Clark. This is season 8, episode 11, number 161 all time. Man, we just missed this being a milestone episode for our guest today. He's not been introduced yet, of course, and I'm going to hold out from doing that as long as possible because I like to make him sweat a little. But we do have a wonderful guest today, a minister of the gospel, and also someone who works closely with Scattered Abroad. You have seen his work, whether by reading it or by just seeing the stuff that has been posted to our Substack. Today we have with us Bradley Smith. Bradley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I've appreciated the podcast for a long time, and so I'm happy to be able to be here today to be a part of it.
Well, I appreciate you and the work that you do. Would you tell people at Scattered Abroad, those of our listeners that may not know much about you, because this is possibly the first time you're really on the forefront of anything that's weekly. I know you've been on the Joint podcast before, but let people know kind of what you do, what work you're involved in with the network.
Yeah, so I am the director of blogging with Scattered Abroad. As Michael mentioned, you can find us on Substack, and we try to post links to social media with as many of the articles as we can. But we have 3 regular blogs. We have the Scattered Bondservants blog, which is ideally a weekly blog. We have the Lessons on Leadership, which is monthly. And then we also have the Joint Journal, which goes along with the Joint podcast and should release the same day. It doesn't always work out that way, but
Sure.
that's the plan. That's the plan for us anyway. But I really enjoy doing that. And our reads or views, or however you want to phrase it, seem to be doing fairly well. So that's a good thing, I believe.
Well, we're certainly appreciative at Scattered Abroad for all the work that Bradley does and the work that you do behind the scenes. A lot of people don't realize that though we have a main team of people that podcast, Scattered Abroad is made up of almost 30 people. And those 30 people all have to do their jobs in order for this network to function. And, sure, people see Wayne, they see myself as probably the front and center because we're involved in director of operations and programming. But without the blogging side of what we've got going on with Bradley and some of the other things that happen with social media, you would not see most of what we do. So certainly make his work worth it and check out those blogs, because Bradley also is one of our resident bloggers, if you will. He has written for us on more than one occasion. And the goal behind, for example, the Scattered Bondservants that we're doing right now is we're doing an Old Testament study of characters. And it's not just the characters that you know and love and have always known and have always read about. We've got some sprinkled in there that maybe you've never taken the time to really talk about. Achan, at the time that we're recording this in May, Achan just came out on our blog about a few days ago. Well, maybe you've never studied about Achan before and you have no clue who he is, what happened, what the story is. Go read that blog, because what we're trying to do with that is kind of what we've called a bird's eye view. It's not an in-depth study. It's about 625 words or less. And it's just an idea of, here is who this character is. Here is what the Bible says about him. Here's what we can take away from it. But then the Lessons on Leadership blog, which ideally is monthly, the 2 directors that are in charge of that blog outside of Bradley posting it are a little bit behind right now. I will fall back on the fact that I was in the hospital. So Wayne doesn't have that excuse, and I'm going to use that until I can no longer use it. But the idea behind the Lessons in Leadership blog is looking at a character in the Bible that was tasked with being a leader, and then basically finding the lessons of application for today. And we've been studying through Jeremiah, and I've enjoyed going through that study and working on it. And my goal is to get my article written here in the next few days, because I'm just waiting on one other thing to be able to finally put pen to paper. But Bradley, unfortunately, is not unaware of the struggle of trying to get something turned in from me. nor is he unaware of the struggle of trying to finish whatever it is I've turned in because of the length of it. And so y'all pray for Bradley. He has to deal with a lot. Do you have anything you want to say on that before we jump into the episode?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say that you're using being in the hospital as an excuse. Your article was due a month before you went into the hospital, so
That's why I went to the hospital, though. No.
to get out of writing it, or
No.
just the stress of.
Yes, that was. I actually, okay, I can say this and then we'll jump into the episode. I asked Megan to give me my computer so I could write it while I was in the hospital, and she refused. So, I did try. But
So thanks, Megan.
exactly, it's her fault. Love you, honey. This season, the theme of the season is far better by quitting. And we've got a big announcement, we're getting down to at the end of the season that we want to talk to you guys about and let you know. But right now, we're in the middle of a study. Really, we're at the end of a study that we've been talking about quitting error. And I thought that it would be appropriate to close that little section from episodes 8 all the way down to 12 by saying we need to quit teaching error. And that's something that I think we often do not really respect and understand as much as we should and could, because it's one thing to listen to error. It's one thing to accept error because maybe you've never known any better. But it's another thing entirely to teach it and to be going around and spreading something that is incorrect. And I want to lead off with a story I heard as a child and then get into the questions, Bradley. But my dad told a story when I was growing up, and he still tells it sometimes, about how one day he was driving into the office and he saw what looked to be a catastrophic accident that had happened with a bus that was turned over. Children were lying all on the ground, and they all looked like they had been in this massive car accident. And Dad was just so pricked and touched by that and just, beside himself. He got into the office and he said, I guess you've heard the news, and talks to his secretary. And she said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there's this school bus piled over and there's all these problems. She said, hey, that's an emergency training drill. And they do that to be prepared if something catastrophic ever does happen. This is what the protocol is. Now, if my dad had not been heading into the office that day and we're just driving on to the next city, maybe he passing through, traveling, doing something, what very likely would have been believed for the rest of his life was that he got to see the aftermath of a catastrophic event that in reality he would have been incorrect in saying he had witnessed. And so as we think about this subject of quit teaching error, I think that's a really great place for us to start this discussion, is that things can sometimes seem to be one thing, but in reality we are incorrect. And because man has never been known to be perfect in his ability to judge things on his own and to know whether something is or isn't right off the bat, there's an importance in this subject. So Bradley, when we talk about the mindset of teaching error, why should someone quit doing this?
Well, I think the first place that you need to start with is that whenever we teach error, we're teaching something contrary to the doctrine of Christ. And
Right.
Second John 9-11 tells us about how dangerous and how damaging to the soul that it is to teach error. And I think whenever you look at reasons why people might teach error, I think it's really one of two things. Either they don't know any better, so they're just saying what they believe to be true, or some others might teach error knowing that it's false and saying
Mm-hmm.
it because they know it to be false. And so
Right.
why someone should quit, if I'm teaching error and I'm doing it unknowingly, I should quit because I should want to be studying and learning and being able to correct this error that I'm making. Or if I'm intentionally misleading people, Jesus talks so often, called the scribes and Pharisees blind guides. So I think you see that a lot in our religious landscape of today. That there are some people intentionally misleading others, and that's never a good thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about Joseph's brothers,
Hmm.
who essentially go to his father with this coat, his coat dipped in blood, and they give it to his father, and his father makes the natural jump that any of us would make, just like my dad had made the natural jump. Joseph is dead. When in reality, Joseph had been sold into slavery by the very brothers that then tried to act like they were distraught over finding this coat that was coated in blood, if you will. And they find this mentality of saying, we'll trick our father into believing that Joseph has died, and that will solve our problem. The thing that I think is interesting as Old Testament is concerned with this particular example with Joseph's father, he believed wholeheartedly that his son was dead. And to think about what we've all experienced with the natural grief of our own losses that we've faced with loved ones, to talk to a father that may have lost his child and to say, what type of grief did you experience? What were the things that you went through? Error is always harmful. And in this case, with Joseph's father believing Joseph has died, it was so harmful because it caused a father to grieve something he didn't need to be grieving. It caused a father to go through a process of just tremendous agony that he didn't even have to be experiencing. And the brothers didn't care about that because it benefited them for Joseph to be gone. I would submit, as we talk about this subject, that is always the crux of why error is taught. It benefits us in a way that doesn't benefit God. And because it benefits us, it's more acceptable to teach. And we see this a lot where there are people who at times in services will sit in the pew and they need sermons on particular subjects, but the preacher refuses to preach on them because he is afraid of what will happen if he does. Or the elders refuse to call for the sermons to be preached because they're afraid of what will happen to the collection plate. And as you look at all of those things coming together, that's the exact mentality of what happened with Joseph's brothers going after him and trying to sell him into slavery, getting rid of him, and then saying, what will benefit us? Well, let's kill him. Not for real, but let's make him think that his son has died, and we'll be able to kind of wash our hands of this, and to think of the cruelty involved in that. And that's what error really does. As you and I think about this mindset with Joseph, Joseph finally got some comeuppance, be able to give to his brothers from what happened. And I think it is incredible how God always finds a way to right the wrong that has been done. But when we see people teaching error today, unfortunately, that comeuppance doesn't always go the same way that Joseph did, because God's not going to intervene and forcibly make everybody believe truth or not. And so there's this massive importance in teaching the truth and quit teaching error because of the lives that it damages. How many people have gone home Sunday after Sunday having no idea what it means to change their life, having no idea what it means to be better and to be better equipped as a gospel, New Testament Christian, because their preacher, their Bible class teacher, their elders refuse to teach it. Mm-hmm. It's a huge problem. You have anything else you want to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, carrying along with the example that you gave of Joseph, one of the other bad things about false teaching is the residual effect. Yes, his brothers went out of their way to intentionally mislead their father, but think about how many people over the course of time that Jacob might have told, well, one of my sons is dead. It was a residual trickle down effect of how many people now believed that Joseph was dead, even though it wasn't the case. So false doctrine doesn't just stop with the initial hearer. It can then go and spread to others, whether it be, teaching children or, other conversations or, posts on Facebook or things like that. It spreads.
Right. And it's interesting too. We find in Genesis 37 and verse 3, it says Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. It's interesting. If you don't really know the background, Israel's his name now, but we know what his name used to be. It was Jacob. And Bradley, what do we know that Jacob did to his own father?
Deceived him. He
Yeah.
lied to him.
He taught error. I mean, he
Yeah.
legitimately said, yes, I am Esau. He
Yeah.
wore these things on his arms to make him feel hairier because he knew Esau was a hairy man. And he does all of this to try to make his father believe that he's worthy of the birthright. It is amazing, again, how God finds ways to kind of right the ship. As horrible as it was that Israel, who we know to be Jacob as well, dealt with the loss of his son, you have to wonder if when it was discovered that his children deceived him, when he learned that Joseph was alive, when he learned that nothing that had been told to him was accurate, you have to wonder if he thought, I've gotten what I deserve because I did the same thing to my brother. And there is this age-old mentality and statement of what goes around comes around. Oftentimes I don't know that I would be, pounding the pulpit saying it's karma, but the idea of karma, though it has been taken too far, is not unknown to us in Scripture. What goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. That's the literal idea of Galatians 6 and verse 7. If you're a bad person, you're going to also have bad things happen to you. That thing will happen eventually, whether it happens right now or whether it happens later, it will take place. And in verse 4, the Bible tells us that when his brothers saw that Israel loved Joseph more than all his brothers, they hated him so much that they couldn't even speak peaceably to him. And it goes on, and this is the chapter where he's sold into slavery, and they were going to kill him, but then they end up going back and saying in verse 31, they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. I'd never thought about this before, but killed a kid of the goats. Is it possible that they also robbed God of a potential sacrifice by killing this goat to further promote what would be easier for them to experience? You can't deny the possibility, at least. And here again, what you said a moment ago, the trickle-down effect of what happens when we teach something that is incorrect and we do something that is error to further benefit ourselves. It's not incredible. It's not incredibly difficult, I should say, to wonder if by killing that kid of the goats, which we often find the Bible talking about being utilized in certain sacrifices and being utilized for certain things, that they also took away from God and what they were expected to do too. Do you have anything else you want to add on this, Bradley, before we move to the next question?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay. Well, as we go to the second question here, I want to ask this. What tips can we all use to help someone quit teaching error?
Well, I think the first step, first and foremost, is you've got to go to the individual. Matthew chapter 18, Jesus talked about what we do whenever we have a conflict with a brother, and you go to the individual. In that instance of somebody teaching error just because they don't realize it and they haven't, considered the alternative, if you go to them and talk to them about it, you have a better chance of helping that individual see what is right than just immediately jump in and blast them like that. But go to the individual, go to the Bible. That's the one thing that we know is indisputable. Is if that's what the Bible teaches, that's what is truth. So rather than saying, well, I've always viewed it as this, or I've always thought about it as, well, what does the Bible say about this? And then as well, you can't. How do I want to phrase it? You can't encourage the individual to continue teaching false doctrine. What I mean by that is you can't act like everything is okay and well and good when this individual, meaning to or not, is teaching error. You can't say, well, they've got to figure that out, or they've got to do something about that. For instance, I've had good friends personally who started teaching error, and it got to a point where I couldn't have anything to do with them because by my association with them, they thought that, oh well, everything is fine. Well, no, it's not. You're teaching error. So kind of like First Corinthians chapter 5, at a point you've got to get these people out of your life. And if it's
Yep.
somebody in a congregation, that person needs to be uh, recognized as out of fellowship.
It is, like you just said a second ago, how do I want to say this? The Bible talks about in Matthew chapter 10. Let me pull this up here real quick. We often don't necessarily jump here with what we're doing, but the Bible says in Matthew 10 and verse 14, whoever will not receive you or hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Almost as if to say, I don't even want the dust from a non-believer city going to the next place. I don't even want the dust to come with you. Shake the dust off your feet. And that also doesn't make as much sense to us today in our culture because we don't have sandals the same way they did and walk the same way they walked. Their feet would have been caked and covered in this. So it's essentially Jesus saying, clean your feet before you leave because that city's dust shouldn't go with you because they wouldn't receive truth. What you just described, Bradley, is this mindset of what we have to do when someone refuses to obey the truth. There comes a point where you have to shake the dust off your feet. But I fear that we're not willing at times to do that. We refuse to do it even. And I've heard people say, well, I know they're a false teacher. I know they teach error, but I'm just going to keep going with them. I'm just going to keep doing what I can. But the Bible tells me that a certain point happens where I can no longer do anything more. They won't change. They won't listen. It's kind of like Paul would write, ever learning, but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. And this understanding of I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and you just have to accept it. Jesus says that's not how it works. And I find it amazing how these are instructions given to Jesus's disciples on how they are to behave as preachers of the gospel. And he says, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. And you cannot overlook the importance of teaching truth and expecting men to obey it. But there's something that we've often sung that would be my tip, kind of. But I don't know if this was something where these are the original lyrics and where I went to camp for a long time, they changed them to be more biblical. But I like the lyrics we would sing at camp. I'm sure you know the song, Bradley, Sanctuary. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. You don't know that song? Wow, man,
No.
we're gonna have to get you some Christian culture here. But this song is a beautiful song about teach me to be what you want me to be. And there's a verse in that song that this is the way it reads in the lyrics that are before me. And I want to offer an update. And if you listen and you actually know this song, unlike Bradley, and you want to change the lyrics to this, I would recommend it because I think it provides a better biblical pattern. This is the verse. Lord, teach your children to stop their fighting, start uniting all as one. Let's get together, loving forever, sanctuary for you. I have no problem until the very end of that part. Because what I grew up singing at camp was, Lord, teach your children to stop their fighting, start uniting all as one. Let's get together and read the Bible. Do what it says to be one. That's the better biblical pattern. Loving forever in our culture today conveys a mentality of, I have to accept you for whatever it is that you do and however it is that you are. Reading the Bible and doing what it says to will stop error in its tracks. It will prevent it from ever growing and from ever getting to a point. And Jesus understood this mentality by pointing out with the parable of the sower that the world is going to do what it can to choke out the word of God. It's going to do everything in its power to keep it from growing. But if we maintain the mentality of being planted in good soil and growing and growing and growing, error will never affect us the way that it will affect others. It can still be a problem. And certainly I don't want to suggest that error is not around today. It doesn't exist because we know that it does. But if we were to get together and read the Bible and do what it says to do, we'll be united and there will be no division. And Paul, ironically, and one of the best passages and one of the best books, I should say, on this subject, talks about in 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 10 to not be divided, to be together, where he says, I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing. We can't overlook this. And Bradley, I love what you said a minute ago with the mentality of, I've had friends who have done that, so have I. If I'm supposed to speak the same thing on the matters that matter, then I cannot have somebody speak something differently and expect that God's just going to somehow be okay with that. That's not going to work. And that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. And the house of Chloe had informed Paul that there were some contentions and divisions among them, or quarrels even, as one verse translation says. And Paul jumps right into it and talks about baptism here specifically, but his principle applies to all denominational teachings and all doctrinal teachings. In verse 13, is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? If you were not baptized under Paul's name, or Apollos or Cephas, and you're baptized of Christ and in his name, then what he teaches is what's supposed to matter. And it's amazing how he does this in chapter 11 and verse 1, where he says, imitate me just as I also imitate Christ, meaning that there is a standard of what we're supposed to believe and do. And so a tip that I would give to kind of stop teaching error is imitate Christ. Did Christ ever teach anything that was truly erroneous? No. He was accused as such. They called him a blasphemer. They said he was teaching false doctrine. But in John 10 and verse 30, where Jesus says, I and the Father are one. We are deity. I am the Son of God, John 3:16, that has been sent into the world to save mankind from its sin problem. Well, if I'm going to imitate him, I'll teach what he taught, and I'll do what he did. And that will also cover the fact that people often have mentioned, and I have an issue with it more so than I ever did. I don't hate the words of Christ being in red or blue or a different color. I understand why we do it. But I wrote, thanks to an assignment that you gave me years ago, I believe on Jesus's teachings on humility, where I had the ability, well, it was Gary Colley, same lectureship that you ended up directing after that, but Brother Colley assigned that to me. I discovered something that had just kind of hit me. Jesus's teachings on humility is the whole New Testament teaching on humility. Anything that a New Testament author says on humility is from Christ, because Jesus said in the book of John, I'm leaving, and when I leave, I'm sending the Comforter to guide you into all truth. And whatever he says is what I would say. And so we know then that Paul can't be contradicting Jesus when he writes in Romans 1:19 through 32 about homosexuality. We know that Paul can't be contradicting Jesus when he talks about the idea of marriage, divorce, and remarriage in 1 Corinthians, or is it Romans 7? I believe 1 Corinthians 7 and Romans, when he talks about this mentality of what is a proper approach to the marital law. He can't contradict Jesus because he's inspired by the Holy Spirit, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, meaning he's indirectly and directly being told what to do, but indirectly it's as if Jesus himself is saying, this is what I want you to know, because the Spirit's saying it. We were told in school sometimes by the secretaries, for example, Brother Liddell wants you to do a study hall this afternoon. Okay. Did any of us, when we were told that, stand up and say, unless I hear it from Brother Liddell himself, I refuse to have a study hall today? Well, you could try that, but it ain't going to work. We understood that though it wasn't coming directly from Brother Liddell's mouth to our ears, he told someone who came in to guide us into the truth of what we were supposed to do that day. That's what the Spirit provided for the disciples and the writers of the New Testament. So those are some of the tips that I would, I guess, give as a word vomit, kind of way to say this is what we need to be thinking. It all culminates with 1 Corinthians 11:1. If we'll imitate Christ, we will not teach error. If we imitate Christ, we will not believe it either. Bradley, do you have anything else you want to add to that before we jump into the final question?
Yeah. As you're kind of talking about that, and if we're complacent with just,
Hmm.
hanging around sin and hanging around false doctrine, eventually it's going to rub off on us. It might
Right.
take time, and it might, um, it to the same. At a point, it's going to rub off on us, and our consciences are going to be dulled to the fact of, well, this is wrong, but this person, I trust them, and I think they want to do the right thing. And this is wrong, but well, we can't let ourselves do that.
And that's, I think, the problem. We're spineless at times. I think that's it's a strong way to put it, but I think it needs to be said. And let me just harp for a moment. If I call you up and I tell you so and so is teaching error, and you continue to like their Facebook posts, you continue to promote them, you continue to invite them, you continue to be involved with them, um, you're saying two things. One, you're saying you don't really care whether it's true or not that this has been said. But two, you're also saying you don't trust the source that's come to you. Now, maybe you don't need to. Maybe you shouldn't trust that source. But I get weary or wary. No, weary is the word I want. Um, I get weary of the mentality that we sometimes have where someone will call up and say, Brother so and so's living in sin. And I hear people say, well, I'm not involved in that. I don't need to know anything. I don't need to know the details. I don't need to know what's going on with that. Well, call so and so and he'll fill you in. No, I'm going to stay out of it. I know we were taught about Nehemiah and the plains of Ono, but that wasn't what was happening with Nehemiah, where Nehemiah says, well, it's not important to me that I go and deal with these men. Nehemiah said, I'm doing a good work here that will not be affected by what they do. But when I allow somebody who is either living in error or teaching error to be liked on Facebook by what I'm doing, to be promoted, sharing their stuff, talking about, look at what happened here. And I've seen it in the last few weeks, even of some places that are sharing articles written by some of the very people who refuse to teach the truth on social drinking. And we're still sharing their articles. And we where is our spine? Where is our backbone? We have got to quit this. It cannot continue to be done this way. And I know that it's impossible to always be well informed. You may not know any better. I was talking to a preacher friend the other day about somebody that had been let go because of the process of teaching error, refusing to teach the truth on a subject. And this individual didn't know any better. And he had been talking to this person and was encouraging them. And I said, hey, I just thought you should know they're teaching error in this subject matter. And as soon as that was said, the whole demeanor of the other person changed. I said, that's good to know. I'll be praying for them to change, but I will start cutting off the encouragement that I'm giving to them right now, knowing that they're living in sin. And that's what teaching error really means. We probably even need to quit. Probably even need to quit saying quit teaching error and just say quit sinning, quit
Yeah.
promoting sin, quit promoting false doctrine. We try to just put a bow on things and make them sound a little bit more palatable than they really are supposed to. And the error that is so prevalent among us today needs to be shut down. Anything else you want to add on that before we jump to the final question?
Yeah, no, I've heard people say sometimes, well, this guy's off on this, but he's good in other aspects. So we just won't
Right.
ask him to teach on that. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
How would you say, like, a doctor? Well, a doctor is not real good at uh, whatever doctors do, but I'm
Open
going to
heart
trust it.
surgery.
He's not great at open heart surgery, but I'm not having open heart surgery. I'm just having a valve replaced. It's still
Right.
related to the heart, but it's not open
Right.
heart surgery. Uh,
Exactly.
that's ridiculous.
Well, have you heard about Dr. Death?
You've told me about him.
Well, not the one that I thought.
Oh,
That's on it. Did that really happen? We'll plug that show real quick. But Dr. Death was a man Christopher Dunch, I believe, who injured 33 out of 38 patients in less than 2 years before his license was revoked by the Texas Medical Board. Now, here's what I want to point out. I watched a documentary on this guy, and the first patient they interviewed, things went very wrong. They were awful. And that patient went under the knife again by the same guy. And it like you're doing, it's not funny, but it is still funny. Like, what do you expect? You thought he wasn't a good doctor, but let's give him another chance because maybe he'll get it right this time. You're right. We don't do that with things that pertain to our physical body. I would not go to a doctor that had not been fully trained and try to get any type of medical advice from him if I weren't confident that he were able to provide that for me. And yet, with the thing that matters more than even my own physical health, we'll flirt with that. That'll be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. What's wrong with us?
This pilot is pretty good at takeoffs, and in the air he's great, but landings he's extremely shaky. I don't know that I
So
would
we're going to
trust
let him
him to
take
land.
off. And then as soon as we're in the air, is anybody here able to land a plane?
Yeah.
No one would do that, but we allow it to happen a lot when it comes to teaching the truth versus teaching error. All right, Bradley, final question here. Who are some characters in the Bible who did and did not struggle in no longer teaching error? Who's some that come to mind that did struggle with not teaching error anymore? Who's some that come to mind with they learned the truth and they said, okay, we're not doing that anymore?
I don't know if you would classify him technically as, teaching error or what the case would be, but whenever we read about Simon, the sorcerer in Acts chapter 8, he had obeyed the gospel. And then you see, obviously, that he still had impure motives. He didn't have an understanding of what was going on because he tried to, purchase the apostles' ability. And, well, no, obviously you can't do that. Well, then after he was confronted with that, obviously he realized the error of his ways. Then I think about Aquila and Priscilla with Apollos and how they were able to take and teach him and help him to understand more accurately. Then also lost it. I had one more and I lost it.
All right, well, you keep thinking about it, and I'll give some of mine. The first, I think that we may never stop and think, is the serpent. We know him as Satan as well. But Genesis chapter 3, the Bible tells us the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, and this is what's amazing. He asks, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Which he knew was not right. He knew that that wasn't correct. And she said, well, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but there's a tree in the midst that we're not allowed to eat, not even touch it, lest we die. What is often overlooked is the fact that the only thing that the serpent changed is he added one letter. That's it. He said, you will not surely die. That's all he changed. One word. And yet that one little word, not, put the rest of mankind in knots with sin. And it took us from a place where we were in a covenant relationship with God, removed from that. And from that time forward, after eating that fruit in verse 6, man had a sin problem. But then we get to John chapter 8 and verse 44, where the Bible tells us that, they'd made the statement in verse 39, Abraham's our father. He says, if you were Abraham's children, you do the works of Abraham. You would be like him. But you're seeking to kill me, a man who's told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham didn't do this. You do the deeds of your father. And they said, well, we weren't born of fornication. We have one father. That's God. And he says, well, if God were your father, you'd love me because I proceeded forth and came from God. Nor have I come of myself, but he sent me. What's wrong with y'all? Why aren't you understanding my speech? Because you're not able to listen to my word. And he says, here's the problem. You want to know? Here's your issue. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there's no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he's a liar and the father of it. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. I look at chapter 8, verses 44 and 45, and I think it would be appropriate for someone, if you mark in your Bible, which is our podcast that comes out on Tuesdays with Josh Walker, another shameless plug. If you mark in your Bible, go ahead and write Genesis 3 and verse 6 and the verses Genesis 3, 1 through 6, because they wanted to do what Satan wanted them to do. That was their desire. And in that moment, they chose to be children of the devil, and he's a liar. He does not stand in truth. There's no truth in him. If Satan tells you something, it's a lie. Satan could tell you water's wet, and I would believe that some new scientific method has been discovered that proves that water is no longer wet, because Satan is a liar. And what ends up happening in the New Testament, we have it as our theme verse here at the school, 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 5. The Bible, of course, talks about preaching the word, being ready in season, out of season, reproving, rebuking, exhorting, with all long suffering and doctrine. Look at these words for just a moment. The word convince means to bring to light or expose something. We have to have the evidence to support our claim. The word rebuke conveys a mentality of speak seriously, warning, or punishing. And that word exhort conveys this notion of to call to one side, basically encourage somebody, appeal to them. Why are these three things important with all long suffering and teaching? Because the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. That word fables, when we look it up, it literally means a myth. It conveys a notion of a legend, a tale. We talk about tall tales and things that there's no way they were true. That's what this word means in the Greek. It means a mentality of you're saying a myth, something you can't prove to be true. But we have to be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, doing the work of an evangelist, fulfilling our ministry. We cannot allow fables to rule in the church. We cannot allow fables to have a spot in the church. And this was the warning that they were told. But it's incredible how I've said this multiple times on the podcast, but it was such a good quote. It bears repeating every time that I think of it. Brother Liddell last year at the Power Lectureship said, it's amazing to me how so often people will set out on a journey to study a subject with a controversial opinion that has, according to them, not what they currently hold or believe, and yet somehow, some way, when they finish studying, they come to the conclusion they had hoped to find all along. And that is truly the problem with some of our preachers today. That is truly an issue with some of our churches today, our congregations that are meeting and finding we see nothing wrong with this. The final example that comes to my mind is Uzzah with David. They broke God's law by bringing out this ox or these oxen and these carts in 2 Samuel chapter 6. And David has no clue why God has made a breach against them, is what he basically states. Why has God come after us? But then David finally realizes later on, hey, we're the ones that made a breach against God because we took what was unauthorized and promoted it as truth. That's teaching error. And I know it might seem strange. We're in a New Testament age, and I've heavily relied on the Old Testament to really talk about these subject matters. But I think it's important that we realize that error has been around long before the New Testament. False teaching's been around long before the New Testament church. Even in Jeremiah's day, there were people saying, it's not going to be that many years. It's just going to be a few. Well, of course, that sounds better to people, but it's not true. Imagine this, and then I'll throw it to you for any final comments you might have, Bradley, before we do our outro. Imagine you get pulled over, okay? And there's two police officers that show up. And the first officer comes over, and he says, hey, Um, it happens. You know, you were doing 70 and a 25. We've been there. It happens. You know, don't worry. I'm not going to throw the book at you. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Um, you just do whatever you want, and we'll let you go here in just a minute. My partner's going to say some things, but don't worry about it. We're going to let you off with a warning. Well, what happens then when the partner shows up and he says, no, we're not. You were doing 70 and a 25 during a school zone. You're going to jail. Like we're taking you and arresting you. Well, one guy told me I was off scot-free, but that wasn't the truth. It doesn't matter what is said. If the law is broken, the law needs to be obeyed. And when it is broken, there needs to be consequences. The problem with what we read about New Testament truth and the error that's so easily set before us, the payment for that is not a speeding ticket. It's not a night or two in the local jail and then a trial where you might get probation and then have to do community service, or even to a greater extreme, it's not prison for the rest of your life. It's eternal damnation. That means this is something serious that we need to quit teaching and quit doing. Bradley, you have anything else you want to add?
No, you're absolutely right. The consequences are so serious for us. Why would we want to teach error?
Exactly. Well, Bradley's information of what he does will be down in the show notes. Something I will plug shamelessly for you. Bradley operates a food truck in the Murray, Kentucky area. Goes all over the place in that little part of Kentucky, and is quite the cook, and is a very, very good barbecue, maker, if you will. I don't know what the exact word would be, but Bradley doesn't have much that I've tried that I have not enjoyed. And some of the things that I've tried that I have not enjoyed are just because they don't sit well on my stomach with my Crohn's disease. So if you're ever in the area, Bradley, I'll put this in the show notes for people too, because I think it's important that we help people that are members of the church in doing something like this. But talk about your food truck real quick and where they normally might be able to find you and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's called Peanuts Breakfast and Barbecue, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We do breakfast and we do some barbecue items. We do a lot of burgers mainly around lunchtime, and those are pretty popular. But we set up, like Michael said, in the Murray, Kentucky area. 3 days a week we're in Mayfield, and then just kind of sporadically around just wherever we can. But we really enjoy that, and it's good. We do catering as well. Not a full sales pitch or anything like that. Just want
Sure.
to throw
Hey,
that in
do it.
there. And of course, all that's in addition to everything here with Scattered Abroad. Then also local preaching at Hickory Grove in Murray, Kentucky. And then I also coach basketball as well. And I'm on the water commission for the area. So not a lot of free time. I stay busy, but they're all things I very much enjoy.
Well, and it's good that you're in the community that way. That's necessary. It's needed. And I'm sure it's provided at least the opportunity to have contacts set up for potential studies and other things. We appreciate all that you do. As far as the podcast today, thank you for joining me and being a part of this. I hope that you listening have enjoyed hearing a newer voice on the network with Bradley joining us today. I enjoyed what he had to say. Grateful that we had the chance to work together today, specifically through the podcast. As far as Scattered Abroad is concerned, remember, we're a work of the Memphis School of Preaching. You can find more out about MSOP at msop.org. You can visit our link tree, which is down in the show notes. Our website is scatteredabroad.org right now. We're in the process of shifting that over to be a part of the school site, so it's all in one location. So just kind of hold off on any updates that you might see that need to be done. You can like and share us on Facebook. That link is in the show notes. Our Instagram is in the show notes. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Scattered Abroad Network. And if you have anything that you'd like to contact us about, you can email us at san@msop.org. If you're interested in supporting this network in any way or supporting the Memphis School of Preaching in any way, don't hesitate to contact us through this email. We'll get you squared away where you need to go. Bradley, thanks so much for joining, being a part of the podcast today. And Lord willing, next week, we're going to have another person first time on the podcast, Haston Handley. We're going to be talking about quitting. And that will be an interesting subject, no doubt, to study. And then we've got a series coming up here with the Mallory family, Caden, Joe, and Brennan, and Justin Johnson. And then we'll close out with our guest, with Joe Wells, and then you'll have just me for the last 3 episodes of the season. I know, bummer. All these great guests, and then you just have to end it with me. It's a terrible way to end the show. But thank you so much. Let's remember to please God now, so our eternity can be far better.